The private dining room at Château Laurent in downtown Vancouver was the kind of place where the tablecloths cost more to launder than most people earned in a day, and everyone seated at the tables knew it. Serena Adler knew it too. She just happened to be the one refilling the water glasses. She moved through the room the way she had trained herself to move over the past 2 years, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. That was the job. You were not a person in a room like this. You were a function. You appeared when something was needed and disappeared when it wasn't, and the less the guests registered your existence, the better you were doing your job. Tonight, Table 7 had been booked under the name Drummond and Associates. 2 men, 1 guest. Serena had watched them from across the room for the past 40 minutes and understood, with the particular clarity that came from paying close attention to things other people ignored, that something was very wrong. The guest at Table 7 was a woman in her early 60s named Kwon Soo-yeon. Serena knew this because she had seen the reservation notes and because Maître d'Philippe had briefed the floor staff before service. Handle with care, high profile. The firm has been courting this account for 8 months. What Philippe had not mentioned, what Serena suspected he didn't know, was that Kwon Soo-yeon, the founder and chair of Haesung Capital, one of Seoul's most formidable private equity firms, did not appear to speak more than a handful of words of English. And the 2 men seated across from her, Derek Drummond, senior partner at Drummond and Associates, and his colleague, Jasper Fenn, had apparently decided that this was not their problem. Drummond was the kind of man who wore his confidence like a piece of expensive luggage, conspicuously, so everyone could see the brand. He had the particular ease of someone who had never once been in a room and wondered if he belonged there. He was laughing now at something Fenn had said, his hand resting on a leather portfolio that sat unopened on the table between them, and Kwon Soo-yeon sat across from them both with her hands perfectly, professionally blank. She had been sitting like that for 40 minutes. Serena approached the table to clear the appetizer plates. "More water?" she asked. Drummond didn't look up. "Us, we're fine." Kwon looked at Serena as she reached across to lift a plate. For just a moment, a single unguarded second, the older woman's composure slipped. It wasn't distress exactly, it was exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had been sitting in polite silence for the better part of an hour, surrounded by words she couldn't catch, unable to ask a single question, too proud to show it and too experienced to panic. Serena recognized it. She recognized it the way you recognize something you've felt yourself. She stepped back from the table and returned to the service station at the side of the room. She had grown up in 2 languages. Her mother was from Busan, had come to Vancouver in her late 20s, and had raised Serena in a household where Korean was the language of home, and English was the language of everything else. Serena had studied both formally. She had, in fact, spent 2 years in a linguistics program at UBC on a scholarship she'd earned by outperforming every other applicant in her intake year, before her mother had gotten sick and the scholarship money had proven to be not quite enough to cover both tuition and the gap in her mother's medication. Costs that the provincial plan didn't reach. She had taken the job at Château Laurent on what she told herself was a temporary basis. That had been 26 months ago. She stood at the service station now and watched Drummond open the leather portfolio at last, sliding a document across the table toward Kwon. He was speaking as he did it, one hand moving in the practiced gesture of a man used to presenting. Kwon looked down at the document. She picked it up. She read. Serena was far enough away that she couldn't hear the words clearly, but she could see Kwon's face, and she could see the moment the woman's eyes stopped moving across the page, the micro pause, the almost imperceptible tightening around the eyes, and she could see that something in that document had caught Kwon's attention in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable. Then Kwon looked up and said something. She said it quietly, and she said it in Korean. Drummond smiled the way people smile when they have no idea what has been said. "Absolutely," he said. "That's exactly right." Kwon said something else. 100%, Fen agreed pleasantly. Kwon put the document down on the table and looked at the two men across from her, and Serena, watching from across the room, saw something shift in the older woman's expression. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something more considered. Serena picked up the water pitcher and walked back to table 7. She refilled Drummond's glass first, then Fen's. Then she moved to Kwon's side of the table and, as she poured, she let herself read the section of document that was visible above the table's edge. It took her 3 seconds. She put the pitcher down at the service station, excused herself from the floor, walked into the narrow corridor that led to the kitchen, stood with her back against the wall, and breathed. She understood what she had read. She also understood exactly what it would cost her to do anything about it. Château Laurent's staff policy on interacting with guests beyond the requirements of service was not ambiguous. Philippe had made it clear on her first week. You did not insert yourself. You did not offer opinions. You did not engage guests in conversation unless directly invited. Table 7 was one of the highest-profile bookings the restaurant had taken in months. Philippe had his eye on the room all evening, and she needed this job. That was the blunt, unglamorous truth of it. Her mother's follow-up appointments were running through spring. The prescription costs weren't going down. The rent on the apartment they shared in East Van had just gone up $200 a month because the building had been bought by a property management company that was clearly in the process of renovating people out of the neighborhood. She needed this job. She stood in the corridor for 7 seconds. She counted them. Then she walked back onto the floor. She stopped at table 7. She addressed Kwon directly, which was already a departure from protocol. She spoke quietly enough that the words didn't carry to the other tables, but clearly enough that all 3 of them heard her. She spoke in Korean. She said, "Madam Kwon, forgive me for interrupting. I want to make sure you've had a chance to look carefully at clause 14 on the 3rd page. I believe there may be a translation issue, and I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstanding." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt considerably longer. Kwon looked at her, not the polite, surface-level attention that guests occasionally directed at servers when they were feeling generous. She looked at Serena, the way a person looks at something unexpected, with real attention, recalibrating. "You speak Korean," Kwon said. In Korean, Drummond had been reaching for his wine glass. His hand stopped. "Excuse me, what? What's happening?" Serena kept her eyes on Kwon. "I'm sorry to have stepped out of my role. I can step back, but I wanted you to have the opportunity to make an informed decision." Kwon picked up the document. She turned to the 3rd page. She found clause 14. The room was very quiet. After a moment, Kwon asked her, still in Korean, to read it aloud. Serena did. Clause 14, as written in the version of the agreement that sat on the table at Château Laurent that evening, contained an exclusivity provision that had not been disclosed in any of the preceding 8 months of correspondence between Drummond and associates at and Haesung Capital's liaison team. It bound Haesung to a non-compete arrangement across 7 categories of private equity investment in the Canadian and American markets for a period of 6 years. Not the 18 months that had been verbally represented in every meeting prior. Kwon listened to Serena read it. She did not interrupt. When Serena finished, Kwon set the document down with the particular precision of someone controlling a very strong feeling. 6 years, Kwon said, in English. Her pronunciation was careful and exactly correct. Both men went still. Drummond started. That's just standard legal language, that's not. Soo-yeon. The intent was always 6 years, Kwon said again, quietly, with the patience of a person who had once had to fight very hard for every room she was allowed to enter, and who had learned that the quieter you were, the more people revealed. Fenn's face had gone a particular color. He was looking at Drummond. Drummond was looking at the document. Neither of them was looking at Serena, which suited her fine. She had taken a step back toward the service station. She wasn't sure Philippe had seen any of this yet. She wasn't sure what she was going to say to him when he did. You. Kwon turned to Serena. What is your name? Serena, ma'am, Serena. Kwon considered this. You work here. At the restaurant, yes, ma'am, and you saw this. It wasn't quite a question. Serena answered it anyway. I saw the clause when I was clearing the table. I recognized the language. I thought you should know. Kwon was quiet for a moment. Why did you say anything? It would have been easier, that question. The simple one was, because it was wrong, and she was in the room. The more complicated one had to do with her mother, and with 2 years of work, she hadn't been able to finish, and with a particular feeling of being someone whose value other people felt entitled to overlook. She didn't say any of that. It seemed like important information, Serena said. Kwon looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned back to the table and addressed Drummond in English, so deliberate it left no room for interpretation. We are done for this evening, she said. My legal team will review this document. Every page, every clause. You will hear from them. You will not hear from me until they have completed that review. And I will tell you now that what they find will determine whether you hear from me at all. She stood. She was not a tall woman, but she had the posture of someone who had long ago decided that a room's dimensions were not her concern. Drummond stood too, reflexively, the way men in his position stand when they realize they've miscalculated. Soo-yeon, I think we can. You will please not call me by my given name, Kwon said. We are not friends. She picked up her bag from the back of her chair. She looked once more at Serena. Would you walk with me, she asked, to the lobby? Philippe was at the edge of the room. Serena could see him in her peripheral vision, standing very still with the expression of a man experiencing several conflicting responses at once. She caught his eye. He didn't move to stop her. She wasn't sure if that was permission or simply shock. She walked with Kwon Soo-yeon out of the private dining room. In the lobby, Kwon paused near the coat check. A young man materialized from somewhere behind them. Her assistant, Serena, realized who had apparently been waiting in the lobby the entire evening. She's calling the car, Kwon said to him in Korean, with he stepped away and took out his phone. And he stepped away and took out his phone. Then Kwon looked at Serena. You are a server here, but you studied languages? Serena hadn't told her that. Linguistics. At UBC. I left after second year. Why? There was nothing unkind in the question. It was simply direct. Serena had the impression that Kwon was someone who had spent a great deal of her life being spoken around rather than spoken to, and had consequently developed a preference for cutting directly to the thing. My mother got sick, Serena said. The finances changed. Kwon nodded once, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. You intend to go back. It was the first time anyone had asked her that, as though the answer were a matter of course. Not do you ever think about it, or that must have been hard, but simply, you intend to go back. Yes, Serena said, and for the first time in 26 months, saying it didn't feel like grief. Kwon opened her bag and removed a card. It was thick, cream-colored stock, bilingual, with the Hyosung Capital emblem at the top. "My firm has 3 active investment portfolios in Canada," she said. "We will be growing those. We communicate frequently with partners here, with government contacts, with legal teams. I have a translation coordinator in Seoul who manages most of that work. I need someone in Vancouver, someone I can trust, someone with, let's say, the faintest trace of something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but close, demonstrated judgment." Serena took the card. "The compensation is competitive," Kwon added. "I will have someone contact you tomorrow with specifics, if you're interested." "I'm interested," Serena said. Kwon regarded her for another moment. There was something in her expression that Serena couldn't entirely read, but which felt very oddly like recognition. "That clause would have bound my firm for 6 years, Kwon said quietly. "I have built everything I have by knowing what I was sizing. Those men believed that I would not." She paused. "Thank you for making sure that I did." The car arrived. Kwon's assistant held the door. Serena stood on the steps of Château Laurent and watched the car pull out into the rain-wet street, the taillights streaking red across the pavement. The night air was cold in the particular way Vancouver nights in March are cold, damp at the edges, the kind of cold that gets into your coat. She looked down at the card in her hand. Behind her, through the glass doors, she could see Philippe crossing the lobby, with the expression of a man who had several things he needed to say. She would deal with that. She would deal with whatever came next, because that was what she did. She dealt with what came next, had always dealt with what came next, had been dealing with what came next since the day she'd sat across from a financial aid advisor at UBC and heard the specific silence of a door closing. But that was before tonight. She put the card carefully in the interior pocket of her jacket, close to her chest, and she went back inside.